Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. I have a very important update to share with you guys, one that we're going to be taking a little bit of time by going into the shorter time frames of Bitcoin. The S&P 500 has been breaking out and is showing signs that a new bull run is in fact at play. We are only a few percentage away from making a new all-time high, and we know that this is something that's going to positively impact Bitcoin. So for the next couple weeks, it's important that we understand where Bitcoin is headed, how we can expect to see the price action play out, and how to go about making the most profit possible on the volatility when it starts to happen. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty guys, here we are to start off today's video. Now, for a lot of you guys that have been asking me, where have I been? Why have I been not recording so much? And the simple answer is my grandma's been having strokes. They can't really figure out why. They haven't been super major, but they've been these little minor strokes. And ultimately, because they can't figure out why or what's causing it, they don't know what to do, and most likely this is just going to lead to a bigger stroke. So I've been helping my family. If you guys don't know, my grandparents live next door to me, so I oftentimes help take care of them, and that's kind of, ultimately what I do living out here. I live pretty far out in a small town, so kind of a country lifestyle. So that's kind of what I've been doing the last couple weeks, and really the last couple months. She hasn't been feeling well throughout the last year. She's been really sick, and she almost passed away a couple months ago. And so now this is a completely new thing that's been popping up. Really, it was completely separate from the last issue she was having. So if you guys are wondering where I've been, that's why. I just have a lot of family stuff I got to take care of. So understand that if I'm missing here and there, it's probably just because of my family. So I wanted to give you guys that awareness, give you guys that quick update so you at least know what the heck is going on. Now guys, let's jump into the shorter time frames for Bitcoin. And let's actually see what the heck is going on here. It's been a little while since my last update, specifically analyzing the shorter time frames, and I figured today would be a great opportunity for doing so just because of the volatility that we are having. Now guys, as you guys notice, in the last couple days we've had some very big updates inside of Bitcoin's price. Now the first update has really been around this support level, and I would say around 29,000 to even sub 29,000. We were holding support above this range, and we did get this fake out. Temporarily, the support failed, and we did get this flush right below it. But then, as you guys can tell, the price instantly rebounded, and we're now consolidating right back into that mid-range point. And so, as it stands, we're still lower lows and lower highs. Nothing has really changed when we're analyzing things from that perspective. And we should continue to kind of still expect the same thing, unless this is to get a strong move. If we were to get another breakout one way or another, then I would expect that we could see, this actually end up holding. But until that happens, we're going to continue to play the direction the market's already been. And this bottom kind of looks a lot like what we, really just went through a couple months ago when we were consolidating inside of our last range. It kind of reminds me a lot of the last consolidation we went through. And if you guys remember, we had this first flush at a breakdown of support. We held support, kind of consolidated here, and then we had this secondary attempt at a breakdown. Obviously this was a bear trap, and then we saw this breakout right after. Now if you guys remember, this consolidation is very much the same consolidation that we're seeing right here, right now, where we had this fake breakdown, the price breaks back up, and it's the same thing that happened right here. And the question now becomes, do we hold support, or does this thing kind of fade like the last one did? And if you guys remember, I talked about the potential where we were going to hold support right here, and then this was going to get continuation. And we were looking at a potential double bottom breakout right here. Although the secondary capitulation is actually lower than the first. So it's the same sort of price action though. Now the question becomes, do we hold support here? Are we able to hold the mid-range and then get continuation up? Or does this end up fading? Even if we see a little bounce, does this end up just kind of falling back down like this? I don't think that we have any confirmation yet, because when we're getting into the shorter time frames, we can really see this going either way. We can see the potential that this is an impulse, or we can see the potential that this is just, once again, some type of correction. Now, these quick, sudden type of impulses after a long-term correction, they happen all the time, and so it's not like it's giving us one, solid inclination of direction one way or another. It's ultimately just finding direction. And so our only real demand area, I would say that if we start going below $21.1 thousand, if we start going below $29.1 thousand, then at that point I'm assuming that this has failed. What we want to see is basically right where we're at here. We want to see this turn into some type of a strong bounce. Because if we were able to get a big bounce back up to 29.5 thousand, maybe even all the way back up to this range high here at 29.7, and this would ultimately just look like it was going to hold the top to mid-range range before we ended up getting continuation. And so this is the only real bullish scenario that we have, is that this is ultimately going to hold support here in between the mid-range and the upper range. But the real only way I see that happening is if we get a strong reaction right in where we're at here. And as of right now, we're not necessarily seeing that. There is the potential where this is our first impulse, being 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 up. But the way this impulse looks, it looks a little bit too quick for me to really be betting on this actually being just, you know, our first little one wave ABC correction before we do something else. It is possible, but just the way that the price action looks, I'm not necessarily leaning to that as being my go-to. Now, if you guys remember, kind of what I've been watching for has been for us to retest this mid-range point, specifically being our last consolidation. And if you guys remember here, it was this lower high that is very similar to this lower high here. And it was the same one that I was comparing at the beginning of this video. This little double bottom before we get this big breakout, it's very similar as this one right here. And we all remember that shortly after we ended up seeing one more final low. Now, the thing I was watching for was for us to come back down and tag this lower high being $28.444 thousand. And with this last wick, we got close enough that, you know, that was all I was watching for. But the problem then becomes the fact that we're seeing this big sell-off and we don't have any confirmation. Now, a lot of the volatility that's coming in here, because you guys see we had this big wick, big green candle, and now we're opening today with this nasty, almost a bearish engulfing candle. So there's a lot of volatility, and I think that the main reason why we're seeing such weird price action is just because yesterday we got the monthly candle close. So we just started a new monthly, and that last one finally closed, and the second that it closed, we ended up seeing these big, you know, candlesticks coming in here. After it closed, we saw this big green candle kind of do this big wick and then close bullish. But then, you know, the following day after, we ultimately opened red, and it does look like we're getting close to a bearish engulfing. But like I said, guys, if this rejects and we start falling lower, we basically have 29,000 as our last area of support. If it doesn't bounce there, I'm expecting that this thing's ultimately just going to fall to another new low, and we'll just continue on in the same degree of trend that we've been on. So that's at least what's going on in the shorter time frames. Now, what happens if we end up correcting here and do fall to a new low? Because technically we've already hit the level that I was watching for, right? I was expecting that once we came back down and hit this mid-range point, that was where we were going to get continuation and start breaking out. But the way that the market looks down in here, it's looking a little bit weak. Obviously, we don't have confirmation in the shorter time frames, and we've talked about what we needed to see. But if this thing ends up falling and makes another low, then most likely this green is going to end up acting as resistance, and I won't be surprised to see us go all the way back down to 27 and even all the way back down to 26K, really. That's just the scenario and potential that we're going to be watching for now, although I do believe it'd be a little bit quicker than what I just drew here. This kind of just follows along with what we've seen. I do think that, you know, once this green area, 28.5 became resistance, then I am expecting that we'd see a pretty decent and quick drop all the way back down near those range lows. I don't think it really changes the big picture. To me, I'm still bullish on the big picture, and I think that this longer correction is ultimately just going to lead us into a longer consolidation. I don't think that it's going to necessarily mean that we're bearish and we're going to go through a multi-month correction. I'm just personally leaning towards this being a little bit of a deeper correction before we do start to see that next big breakout. When we're zooming out here, looking on the bigger time frames, to me, there's really nothing that has changed too much. On the weekly, you know, this isn't giving us any confirmation. We are now sitting right here on that mid-range point where I wanted to see us hold support. It's still possible that we do hold that, but, you know, like I said, in the shorter time frames, we don't really know yet, and it is looking a little bit more weak. So if this was to become resistance, you know, a move all the way back down to 26 really wouldn't be that crazy, because we don't really have another support level until at least 26, I would say. And if we go to 26, there's an argument to be made that we could come and revisit all the way back down to the range lows. and pretty much the breakout point being about 25K. So there's all these scenarios to consider, and I think the best thing to consider right now is just the fact that if we do see downside, it's all going to be revolving around what Bitcoin does in the shorter time frames, right? Right around this level. Either this is a breakout and a retest before we get continuation. If we see continuation, obviously I'm anticipating Bitcoin's going to be bullish. On the bigger time frames, what I wanted to see was just us hit the mid-range point for us to reverse, and as you guys can tell, we did do that with this last wick yesterday. So as it stands, everything I wanted to see has happened. Now the question comes, are we going to actually hold support, or is this going to end up just being, you know, a bearish engulfing that takes us to new lows? If we do end up rejecting at this level, the potential of a deep correction is very much a real potential, and I think that that's something that we need to understand. If you've got a lot of leverage positions, if you've over-leveraged yourself in any sort of way, maybe bought a bunch of different things, and you're worried about a deeper correction ensuing, you know, if we start rejecting and we very obviously lose the support level, because, you know, guys, like I stated, in the short time frames, we know what to watch for that to happen. In the shorter time frames, if we start losing this mid-range point, because notice we're getting the bounce that I wanted to see. If this bounce continues to get bigger, and like I said, we close all the way back up around 29.6, all the way back up to these range highs being somewhere in here, that does set us up for the very real potential that we're going to get continuation out of this consolidation. But if this bounce ends up being short-lived, and then we reject, and then we just fall and ultimately drop below 29,000, at that point I am expecting a deeper correction. Where is the deeper correction going to take us? Well, the deeper correction could very easily take us all the way back down to 26 and even 25, depending on how gnarly of a correction we get. You guys got to remember here that when we're looking at this chart, there's a few major things to consider here. This was our previous high, right? Now, with our last breakout, we never were able to break back out of that. We had like 6, 7, 8 different attempts at a breakout if you're counting these wicks, and none of them were able to clear back out of these range highs. So as it stands, these range highs are still very strong resistance. We haven't been able to confirm any sort of real breakout up to this point. Now, in the shorter time frames, if we come over here, let's make this red for resistance, and let's look at our next level. Now, I think that this is our next important area of demand because of the fact this was our first lower high, right? After we topped over here in April, we made this lower high, and this was the top of the resistance of our lower high before we made one more final lower low and correction, right? Now, it's important to understand that because we were holding support above that level throughout this entire consolidation as we were awaiting a breakout of the range highs, but then we closed back below. And we've actually closed back below 2 different times, right? 3 different times, arguably. There's once, there's twice. We broke down, we consolidated here. But then most recently, being, you know, today and maybe yesterday, we had the secondary attempt at a retest of that same level only to produce another massive, near bearish engulfing candle. It's not quite there yet. But these are things to consider because if we're looking at things from a basic support and resistance PA perspective, this is bearish, we're breaking down, we're losing all of our important levels. And so that's why I say that because we've made 2 successful lower lows and lower highs, the risk for downside is very much there. And so if we lose the support level that we're at, you know, don't be surprised if we make a deeper correction that could take us all the way back down to these range lows, considering where we're losing up here is a very major psychological resistance level and support, depending on the way you're looking at it. But as of right now, we're technically below support. So in the shorter time frames, like I said, guys, we're just watching for whether this is going to hold a support or whether this is just going to end up being kind of the last bull trap before lower lows. Either way, all of this is kind of coinciding with the S&P 500, and this is something I've updated you guys with consistently. And when we were all the way back down in here in May, around 4,100, I talked about why I believe that we were going to see a move next all the way back up to this green level, being 43.30. And we ended up seeing that exact breakout. In fact, we broke out of it, retested as support, and got another high all the way back up to basically our next resistance. This was our first lower high. Once all of the Russia news came out, they were going to war with Ukraine, we saw the top, the first lower high. And it was at the top of this lower high, the entire market just barely came all the way back to, almost touched the very top. We ended up peaking here at about 4,600, and so we almost went all the way back up to the 786 Fibonacci. So that was a very bullish thing. Well, technically we actually broke above the 786. So as it stands, guys, I don't think that there's any sort of thing inside of the stock market that's telling us we're in a recession. There's nothing telling us that we're going to be in a new bear market, because as it stands, we broke out of the most important resistance that we needed to break out of. And that's what I was talking about here at 4,300. I said that once we broke out of this, that was really the last line of defense that we had to just more or less go full bull, right? That was our last psychological resistance level, and you could have even made the argument that it was even, back down here at 4,100. But for me, once we got above 43, that was the go-to. The stock market's bullish. Everything's going to go to Valhalla. And as it stands, even though we came all the way back up to the 786, and so now as we're looking at the chart today, we're seeing a pullback, and it's coming right after we made this big breakout. So when we're looking at Bitcoin, and we're kind of seeing it sitting up here at these higher resistance levels, now making lower highs, the risk is very much there for downside, because if we're about to see the stock market pull back here, which really wouldn't be that far off to be expected, we won't be surprised to see this thing make a correction all the way back down to, pretty much this green level that I was watching for. Because we did get a retest of that right here, but I wouldn't consider this any sort of real major retest. This was just a short-term pullback before we got continuation. So for us to come back down, make a deeper correction, for the stock market, this is a pretty big sell-off. From where we're at right now to the low, it'd be about a 4.5% move. So keep in mind that in the stock market, that's a pretty decent. Keep in mind that in the stock market, that's a pretty decent drop. And so, if we were to see the stock market pull all the way back to retest this resistance, if we were to see the stock market pull all the way back to retest 4,300, at Bitcoin, we might have the very real potential where we're coming all the way back down to retest, $27,000, $26,000, and $25,000. I don't know exactly, and I'm not trying to say that we're going to go to this specific price, because I really don't know. All that we can go off of is support and resistance, and that's going to give us an idea of how to formulate where the next area of demand is. As we can tell by, Bitcoin making lower lows, lower highs, we keep getting rejected at this high. And we've successfully made 2 lower lows, and we're now rejecting once again. So it's looking like we're now about to set in our next lower high and the potential of another lower low, depending on what happens in the shorter time frames. So if that happens, it would pretty much line up on par with the S&P 500 making a deeper correction, and we would expect to see Bitcoin kind of follow suit. Do I think that it ends any sort of the momentum for Bitcoin? No, not the long-term momentum, just more or less in the short term. Because if the S&P 500 pulls back to this level, Bitcoin's going to pull back. But the S&P 500, if we're looking at this on a bigger time frame, like a weekly, keep in mind, guys, that this thing's most definitely not bearish, right? Even if we see a correction, most likely this is going to bottom and we're just going to break out again, and it'll do kind of the same that it's always done. And so that's why I'm not really too shaken up by Bitcoin. If Bitcoin does make this deeper correction, runs all the way back down and flushes out a lot of the late buyers, it's definitely going to catch a lot of people off guard. It's definitely going to suck just because we don't get up only instantaneous, profit. We're going to have to go through a little bit of turmoil before we get there, but I don't think it changes anything, considering the S&P 500 bullish is ultimately going to drive another Bitcoin bull run, and everything that we've needed to see for the stock market to be bullish has played out. Now for us to correct is just us retesting a very, very major psychological level. Once that level turns into support, I think that's a go-to for Bitcoin to ultimately finish off its blow off top. Because big picture, guys, I'm still looking for the same thing. I'm going to go to a weekly time frame, and we're going to take a look at this chart, because nothing has changed for me. Even if we get a deeper correction here for Bitcoin, we fall back down to this 25K level before making this final blow off top, I'm still expecting a final blow off top. I think Bitcoin will finish anywhere from 40K upwards of $48,500 before this is over. And so the way I would see the S&P 500 factoring into this, if we're to see this correction, it's probably going to happen now, and it will be a decent sized one. Go through another month or two of consolidation before we make that next breakout. But I think that the S&P 500 going into new all-time highs, because that's going to be the next breakout. The second the S&P 500 corrects and finds support down in here, which I think will be around 43.50, 43.30, somewhere around there, basically this line right there, that's where I think that the stock market will find a bottom. And when that happens, we don't have another level until the all-time highs for breakout. We already tagged this one here, so the only one that we have next is the all-time highs at 48.15. So once the next leg up happens, where the S&P 500 is attacking that all-time high, and probably going to be breaking the all-time high, that's where I think Bitcoin finishes its blow off top. You know, the stock market might make another correction, kind of consolidate back around those all-time highs, and that will probably be the point where Bitcoin tops from this level and then makes this long-term consolidation before the new cycle, right? This is way longer because I'm on a weekly time frame. This is like 2026. So obviously I'm not meaning my time frames to be exact, but this is just a rough analogy of what I'm expecting big picture. And so far everything's kind of playing to path. The only difference is we're now seeing a correction in here. So I say that just to give you guys a little bit of caution. If you're over leveraged or whatever it is, if you're in some profit, might not be the worst idea to pull some, but I would wait for confirmation in the shorter time frames. To reiterate this entire video, if this once again continues to look weak, if we just more or less reject here and start falling, and then we break below 29,000, then at that point I'm full-blown bear. I think that's, you know, obviously where we're headed. We're going to be going into a much deeper correction along with the S&P 500. But the last area of support is more or less going to be 29,000, a little bit over that. So that's kind of the area I'm watching. If we break below that, I think Bitcoin's got a much deeper correction in store, and it will probably just end up parrying the S&P 500. Now, the final chart we have to look at today is going to be the total market cap, because during times where I don't know what Bitcoin's doing, I look at the total market cap because the price action, it's just way more, it's more consistent, I would say. I think that's the best word to put it. Now, when we're looking at this, I can't say exactly what the wave count is, but when I just look at the bare bones of ETH, I see a wave count of this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we just finished the first impulse, and I believe that we did just finish our first ABC correction too. Wasn't a very big ABC for a one wave, which tells me there's a lot of buy support in ETH. Now, right after that, we got another impulse, and that would be this one right here. 1, 2. And you can look at this as a couple different ways. 3, 4, and 5. That's the way I'm personally drawing it. And what I think happens next, I believe that we finished wave A. We could be finishing wave B right now, and if that is the case, we would be looking at one more wave C, back down to around $1 trillion in total market cap. And so, once again, this is the total market cap, so it's not like there's a specific price, but ETH would obviously make one more final lower low, and Bitcoin would do the same. For the total market cap, price-wise, you'd be looking at about an 8% drop, which, you know, really isn't that far off from the S&P 500. If the S&P 500 drops 4.5%, Bitcoin's probably going to drop about 10%, and I think the total market cap's going to be pretty consistent with that. But I don't think it changes anything, right? Because when we're looking at this, where's my thing? Right here. This is just a one wave, so that was the completion of a one wave, and this is just another sub wave, right? So this is wave 1, and this impulse is more or less just sub-wave of wave 3. So we're having 1, 3, and then 5, right? And then that'll complete wave 3. And that's why I still think that that's where we're headed. Overall, to me, when I look at the price structure, it doesn't look like we're bearish. It just looks like we could see a deeper correction that is ultimately just going to finish a wave C before we get that next leg up. The S&P 500 correcting just means it's hitting off of this support level, new support for the first time, which I think is what we have to have happen. For Bitcoin pulling back, it really doesn't change anything. We would just have another deeper correction, one more final lower low before this is over. I think regardless, big picture over the next couple months, most likely we're going to be bullish. And that's kind of the way that I'm going to be leaning to. So anyways, guys, wanted to give you this update. Wanted to simplify some things, give you guys a little bit of an idea of what I'm expecting, give you guys some of the levels that I'm watching and targeting, where I think that, you know, Bitcoin's going to go if we see a sell-off, where I think we're going to head if we end up breaking out. So if you guys found value in this, leave a like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these updates. If you guys want to join the Discord server, follow all of the signals that I post. Anything that I'm doing with my money, I post it in my private Discord. So if you guys want to get access to that, there's links in the description to go ahead and sign up. A lot of you guys have been saying that, you know, that you can't get access because my website domain is down. I fixed the link so you guys will be able to actually go ahead and find that. So if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them in the comments below. Email me, message me on Twitter, whatever it is. Links are in the description for all of my contacts. Thank you guys so much for the support. And with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.